Well, welcome back everyone, and today we're going to move along in chapter 1 and finish it out today by looking at systems perspective. Systems perspective is a unique and comprehensive view of all organizations. So we're going to go into some of the details about that, but it's a very important concept for you to grasp. We're also going to take a look at other elements such as absenteeism and turnover, and when things break down, how do you know they're breaking down? When there are problems within the organization, what are some of those key indicators that tell you that something's wrong? Well, we're going to take a look at those. So today we're going to finish up and move along in our course, Individual and Organizational Behavior. Well, everyone, we're about finished with our first week, so let's move on as we complete chapter 1. Now, from a contemporary standpoint, organizational behavior involves the system perspective, situational perspective, contingency, and interactional approaches. Now, it's these that we're going to take a look at in detail. Now, what's the systems perspective? Well, system is an international set of elements that function as a whole. Inputs are combined and transformed by managers into outputs from the system. So we're going to take a look at a diagram of that here in just a moment. But systems essentially means that nothing happens in a vacuum, that the organization as well as culture and society in the world operates on an interdependent and interrelated set of elements, inputs, transformations, and outputs. Now, the value of the systems perspective is that it underscores the importance of an organization's environment. It conceptualizes the flow and interaction of various elements of the organization. Now let's take a look at the next figure here that will show us really visually what systems perspective is all about. Now, as you can see, we have the three elements here. We have inputs, transformations, outputs. You have material inputs. This is the raw material. You have human inputs, financial inputs, and information inputs. All of these, whether individually for specific projects, they all combine to produce a transformation or begin a transformation. It could be manufacturing, as you see here. It could be operations or services. And the goal is to produce an output. And that output should lead to profits. Unfortunately, sometimes it's losses, but also employee behaviors and new information. So all types of things, depending on the inputs and transformation, will result in some type of output, which goes, as you see here, into the environment. The environment puts it back into here, and it goes right back in to go back out to the environment, to go back into the organization as well. So what you see here is a continuum of inputs, transformations, outputs out into the environment, but we also get our inputs from the environment. And we also have feedback. Now, all of this combined will produce information that you can use to alter or adjust or to continue on with your inputs and the way that you transform those inputs. Let's take, for instance, a tire. Tires don't just automatically appear on a truck or a car. Tires have to come from raw materials, and those raw materials come from rubber trees in Central America and the Amazon and all of that. So we take the compound. Now, I say raw materials come from rubber trees. There's chemical components now that I think simulate all of that. But whether it's chemicals or plants or whatever, we take raw material into that tire manufacturing place. And we're going to incorporate the material inputs, which is the raw material itself. Humans have to interact with this stuff so that it can be transformed. We have to have the money to operate, and we have to have the knowledge to be able to take that material and then transform it. Now, all four of those inputs will go into transforming that tire into a tangible, producible object that we can then go and sell to the vendor or automobile manufacturers or whatever. So that would be an output. So we take, and then the output would go into the environment, but we also take from the environment again, more inputs. So you get an idea here of seeing how systems work and operate. Now, one of the key things to me when it comes to the systems approach is, again, nothing happens in a vacuum. Now, folks, let's look at this from a organizational standpoint. All of this is a macro. That means you get a broad picture of all of this. But let's take a micro approach to systems management. And you as the manager are going to have to take a look at the micro in all of it. Let's take a look at your maybe department when you get one. You have employee number one. And employee number one is doing his or her thing. They're doing their job. Employee number two is doing his or her thing, but employee number three is really not pulling his or her weight. In fact, they're bringing things down. Now, employee number four can't really do his or her job because employee number three is not producing what he or she should. Now, if employee number four can't do the job, then that's going to be the same for 5 and 6 and whatever. And eventually it's going to roll back over here to number one. Because what happens with one person is going to affect another. And what that other person is doing or not doing is going to affect another. And eventually it's going to come back around. So you see here that the inputs that you provided to number two and two provided to three started the transformation process, but there was a breakdown here. And that's going to affect the overall output, not only of number three, but number four, and eventually you, and it's going to have an overall effect eventually on everybody. So whenever someone is not producing, whenever someone is not pulling his or her own weight, that's going to provide a snag that's going to disrupt the whole process and the whole flow of your operation. So systems approach means that everything is interrelated and interdependent. And it takes stepping out sometimes from the trees to be able to see the whole forest as such. And when you can do this, folks, you are going to be an effective manager because you'll understand these concepts and be able to apply them not just to your job, but to the whole department and the organization. Now, the situational perspective. This recognizes that most organizational situations and outcomes are influenced by other variables. So there's that cause and effect. Whatever happens in the organization, it's going to be influenced by something. Something causes something else. And it's the situation that will determine that. Now, the universal model presumes a direct cause and effect linkage between variables. And the complexities of human behavior in organizational settings make universal conclusions virtually impossible. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at this other diagram and you'll see. The universal approach says that there is one best way of responding to every situation. That means if there is a chink in the system, if there is a flaw in the system with Ford Motor Company in Duluth, Minnesota, then if the remedy for that would apply to the Ford Motor Company in Bonn, Germany, if they have something similar to it. So the universal approach really says that for every problem, there is a universal solution for it. Whereas a situational approach says that everything is contingent based on the situation and the ways of responding. So that's fairly elementary, but those are the differences. Now you have also the interactionalism, which deals with people and situations, and they focus on how individuals and situations interact continuously to determine individuals' behavior. And it attempts to explain how people select, interpret, and change various situations. And we see human behavior from an interactionalist perspective really coming out in the need to study it more because people respond and behave in different ways to different situations. So interactionalism takes a look at how people respond in different situations depending on the person and depending upon the situation. Now you have individual behaviors, and the idea or the concept of productivity. Narrow measure of efficiency, the number of products or services created per unit of input. So if you're measuring productivity, this is the formula that you use. The number of products created per unit of input. So a person that is putting out, 100 units a day, that's the measure of their efficiency and so forth. But it's what they create per unit of input. Now you have performance. It's a broader concept. It's made up of all work-related behaviors. And that's, again, their willingness to stay late, have a positive attitude. Productivity is what they're putting out. Performance is the overall person. They may be productive, but they may be disruptive. I've known several people throughout my history of working in business and in ministry who can do the job, but they have a bad attitude. They are negative, and their morale stinks, and these people don't last. So productivity is just the unit of output that a person can produce, where performance is the overall person. It's a broader concept. And then commitment is the stick-to-itness, what I call, of a person within an organization, and their willingness to stay and to be engaged and commit to the organization. Now, another concept that we're going to study is organizational citizenship. And that's the behavior of individuals that make a positive overall contribution to the organization. And it encompasses all factors outside the strict requirements of the job. Take, for instance, your community. Now, everyone is required to obey the law. And in that community, you are too. But does that make you a community? Well, I would argue no, because most everybody can obey the law. We're not going to break the law. Most of us, I would assume, are law-abiding citizens. But that really doesn't make us solely a good citizen. What else makes us good citizens? Our sense of caring and us reaching out and our sense of community and so forth. That makes us vibrant, effective, and productive individuals within a collective group called a culture or a society or an organization. So organizational citizenship involves the rules and going by the rules, but it also looks at the sense of community, the sense of cohesion, loyalty, altruism, and so forth that occurs in the workplace. And that's just as important a lot of times as the output of an organization. Now, unfortunately, you're going to have some dysfunctional behaviors. And in an organization, these are behaviors that detract from the performance of the organization. They don't contribute to the performance, they take from it. And some examples are absenteeism, turnover, theft and sabotage, harassment and bullying, politicized behavior, spreading rumors and so forth, and incivility and rudeness. And it doesn't take but one or two to spoil the whole thing. What does the Bible say? Just a little leaven spoils the whole thing. So it's the same concept that you can apply here, is the dysfunctional, the negative behaviors can bring a organization down or the culture down and ruin the morale. So you as an HR professional, you as a manager in organization and individual behaviors are going to have to be able to efficiently and effectively work with these dysfunctional behaviors. Now, strategic execution is the degree to which managers and their employees understand and carry out the actions needed to achieve strategic goals. Now, it often requires balancing seemingly contradictory outcomes. For example, paying high salaries can enhance satisfaction and reduce turnover, but detract from bottom line performance. And oftentimes you're going to have to make decisions which are trade-offs, and sometimes they contradict each other. You may have to let's say, reward a group. And in that group, there may be people who didn't work as hard. But in order to be fair and so forth, and to keep harmony and to be able to maintain stability, you may have to reward some who worked in that group or didn't work too well in that group. But anyway, strategic execution is the degree which the manager's employees understand and they carry out all the actions needed to meet the strategic goals. Now, how do we know what we know? Well, managing used to be a common sense affair. You often heard maybe people in the workplace saying, I've got years of experience and that's my education. I didn't go to business school. I didn't go to management training. I went to the school of hard knocks. So my common sense and my intuition tells me that we need to do this, that, and the other. Well, more often than not, that intuition and that common sense was off base. Organizational behavior relies on the scientific method. And we're going to talk about the scientific method here in just a second. But I won't discount altogether experience and common sense. Now, the book says that they're often wrong, and they are to a large extent. But they're also right a lot of times. When a person knows based on experience that this doesn't happen the way that your textbook may say it does and so forth, I take a situational approach. And as a manager in the past, I have taken people's experience and I have weighed heavily on those. Now, I'll take the facts and the data because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look at objective data and help use that as a basis for our information in our decision making. But that doesn't mean I won't take someone who has 15 or 20 years of experience in that and ask them what has been normally the outcome of all of this. So we have to make sure we balance all of this stuff. But the scientific method here is a 4-step process. It goes with a theory. A theory is just an educated guess. If I do this, then this should occur. From the theory, we go to a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is more or less formalizing our thoughts, our questions, and so forth to progress into research. And then we have data. Data is collecting all the information that we need to be able to conduct the study. And then from our data, we have verification, and that's forming a conclusion based on the data, not our suppositions and not what we think. It's based on the data. Now, the next slide talks about these 4 elements and gives you the definitions for them. So I'll let you guys kind of take a look at all of that. A theory is a collection of assertions, which is an educated guess. Why things happen. A hypothesis is a written prediction. You are formalizing things at this point so that you can begin your research. Now, when it comes to your research, you have several things here. You have an independent variable, and that's a variable that researchers set. That's not going to change. It's going to stay constant. The dependent variable is the variable that researchers measure. And the example here that the authors give you, and I like it here, is wages and employment satisfaction. Here, the wages would be the independent variable. That's not going to change. It's going to be set. And the satisfaction, whether it goes up or down, is the dependent variable. That's going to change based on the independent variable and how the people react to the independent variable. Now, correlations. In scientific research, what you're looking for is relationships. And relationships range from -1 to +1. Now, correlation of +1 is what we call a positive correlation or a positive relationship. That means as one variable increases, the other always increases. Now a negative one is a negative correlation. So as one variable increases, the other decreases. So you see the opposite effect happening. As one increases, the other decreases. And then you have what's called a null hypothesis, which is a correlation of 0, which means that there is no relationship at all between the variables. So let's get a picture of what they're talking about here. And your book talks about that as well. This is a scattergram. A scattergram will, as you see points on a graph that are scattered. And they are so much in disarray that there's really no way of developing a sense of a pattern here. So the correlation here would be 0. But now notice here, we see with a correlation of 1.0, as one thing happens, it increases the other. So as, let's say, as wages go up, employee satisfaction goes up. That's a positive correlation. But what if the adverse happened? What if a decrease or an increase in wages actually made satisfaction go down? I've never seen that happen, but what if that happened? Maybe they get more in debt and their satisfaction decreases. You never know. But what if that happens? So if it did, then you would have a negative correlation. That means as one went up, the other went down, or the result went down. And then you have a 0.30, a 30% correlation here. Now, there's not a whole lot of difference between this one and this one, but there are a few maybe groupings that are a little bit more closely related than what you see up here. And that would be a correlation of plus 30, where you see more of the, you see in here in the negative end, going past 100, you see more of it lumped over here. So that would be probably a correlation of about 30%. It's not all over the place like it is up here. So that would be an example of a correlation on a scattergram of about 30%. Well, everyone, as you can see, nothing happens in a vacuum. It's what I explained during my presentation, and it's true. What you do affects someone else, and what someone else does can affect you. And as we go round and round in this circle of events and chain of events and workflows and all of that, we have to know that if there's a breakdown in any one of these parts, it could affect the whole system. So being able to step away from the trees and see the forest is necessary. And this is what systems approach to management will help you do. Well, you have a good weekend. God bless you, and we'll begin next time in Chapter 2.